Welcome to our deep dive into this fascinating world of well-being.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
No,
We all think we understand,
right,
intuitively, like who doesn't want a good life?
totally.
But it gets surprisingly complex when you start digging into what that actually means.
It really does. It's
Yeah.
like we all want to be happy,
Right.
but is that all there is to it?
Yeah,
That's where philosophy comes in.
exactly.
So we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy
Great source.
as our guide today.
I'm so curious to see what insights we uncover
Yeah.
about this.
Well, the first thing to understand is that philosophers
Okay.
use this term well-being
Okay.
as a very specific term.
Uh,
It's not just about feeling good in the moment.
okay.
It's about what's ultimately good for a person
Okay.
in the long-term view of their life.
So it's less about like fleeting happiness and more about living a life that's actually like beneficial
Yeah,
in a deep and lasting way.
exactly.
And that's where we get this distinction between well-being and self-interest.
Okay.
Self-interest is sort of like
Yeah.
maybe chasing short-term gains,
Right.
even if they're ultimately harmful.
Right.
But well-being is about what truly benefits you over the course of your entire life.
So a life of pure self-indulgence,
Right.
even if it feels good in the moment,
Yeah.
might not actually be a good life
Yeah,
if it leads to long-term problems.
exactly.
Okay, so maybe downing that whole bag of chips right now
Right.
is not contributing to my well-being, even if it feels good right now.
That's a perfect example.
Right.
Philosophers even talk about this possibility of negative well-being.
Okay.
The idea that a life filled with suffering
Mm-hmm.
could actually be worse than having no life at all.
Whoa. Okay, so it's not just about reaching some peak level of happiness.
Right.
It's also about avoiding a life that's actively detrimental or harmful.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Okay.
And this might make you think of,
Yeah.
positive psychology,
Right.
which is a field that kind of explores happiness and fulfillment.
Right.
But it's interesting to note that positive psychology often focuses on things like contentment and life satisfaction,
Uh-huh.
which actually aligns really well with some of the philosophical ideas
Oh, interesting.
we'll be talking about.
Okay, cool. So there's like some overlap between those fields.
There is, yeah, for sure.
That's cool. So like Martin Seligman's
Yeah.
PERMA model from positive psychology,
Uh-huh.
that focuses on positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment.
Yes.
It seems like a more holistic approach to well-being than just chasing momentary happiness.
It does, and it highlights that well-being
Yeah.
is likely a combination of factors,
Mm,
not
yeah.
just one single thing.
Okay.
But as with anything in philosophy, the idea of well-being
Yeah.
has been debated,
It has.
challenged over the years.
I'm curious to hear more about that.
So one challenge came from the philosopher G.E. Moore, and he questioned whether we can really separate good from good for me.
Mm.
So, like, if we say pleasure is good for me,
Okay.
does that actually add anything to saying pleasure is good?
Oh, that's a brain twister.
It is.
It's like, are some things just inherently good, or are they only good because we desire them?
Right, or if no one desired pleasure, would it still be good?
Right.
That was his question.
That's a good question.
And then you have another philosopher, T.M. Scanlon,
Okay.
who questioned whether well-being even works as a unified concept.
Okay.
He argued against this idea of a sphere of compensation, this
Okay.
notion that we can trade off one good thing in life
Right.
for another to achieve some overall well-being.
Okay, so Scanlon's saying you can't just treat different goods like ingredients in a recipe
Yeah,
and just swap them out as needed
right.
and expect like a perfect life is the outcome.
Exactly.
That some things just aren't interchangeable.
Right,
I mean-
no matter how much you want them.
Yeah.
Imagine trying to bake a cake and deciding to swap sugar for salt
Yeah.
because you're out of sugar.
That's not going to work.
Thinking it'll be fine because both are white granular substances.
Right.
That's not going to end well.
That's a great analogy.
And Scanlon's arguing the things that make a life good
yeah.
might not be so easily interchangeable.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So even with all these challenges,
Yeah,
philosophers have come up with all these different theories to try and explain well-being.
they have.
So I'm eager to dive into those. Where should we
Yeah.
start?
Well, perhaps the most intuitive theory,
Okay.
and one that gets praised and criticized
Mm-hmm.
a lot, is hedonism.
Okay.
And at its core, hedonism says that well-being
Yeah.
is all about maximizing pleasure
Okay.
and minimizing pain.
So just trying to cram as much good feeling into life as possible
Exactly.
and avoiding anything unpleasant.
Yes.
The classic pleasure principle.
Yeah,
It sounds good on the surface.
it does.
But I can imagine some potential issues. Wouldn't that mean someone who just spends their life indulging in every whim and desire
Yeah.
is living the good life,
Yeah.
even if those desires are fleeting
Right.
or harmful in the long run?
Yeah. That's one of the criticisms leveled at the simplest form
Okay, yeah.
of hedonism,
Right.
often called quantitative hedonism.
Okay.
It's like if all that mattered was the amount of pleasure,
Uh-huh.
then a brief, intense burst of pleasure
Yeah.
would be just as good as a longer, more
Okay.
subtle experience of joy.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem quite right, does it?
It does feel like there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
Like, wouldn't that reduce us to, I've heard some critics call it the philosophy of swine,
Yes.
as if we're just striving for the same basic satisfaction a pig gets from rolling in the mud.
Right.
There's got to be more to a good life than that.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that's where another strand of hedonism comes in,
Okay.
called qualitative hedonism.
Okay.
And this view, championed by John Stuart Mill, argues that some pleasures are simply better than others.
Okay.
He distinguished between what he called higher pleasures,
Okay.
like intellectual pursuits or appreciating art,
Right.
and lower pleasures,
Okay.
which are more about physical sensations.
So even for a hedonist, it's not just about the amount of pleasure.
Yeah,
It's also the kind of pleasure that you're experiencing.
exactly.
Okay.
And this leads to a really interesting thought experiment
Okay.
that gets brought up when discussing hedonism.
Okay.
It's called the experience machine.
Oh, I've heard of this one.
You have.
It's that hypothetical scenario where you can plug into a machine
Yeah,
that simulates a perfectly pleasurable life.
that's the one.
Like you could experience anything you desire
Yeah,
without any pain or disappointment.
exactly.
That sounds pretty good.
It does. So if hedonism is true,
Yeah.
wouldn't we all want to plug in?
Yeah, you would think.
Because that would be maximum pleasure and zero pain. But
Yeah.
the catch is that a lot of people, when confronted with this thought experiment, say they wouldn't plug in.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree.
Right.
As tempting as a simulated life of constant bliss might sound,
Yeah.
there's something about actually living your life
Yeah.
with all its ups and downs
Uh-huh.
that feels more meaningful.
Okay.
Like facing challenges,
Mm-hmm.
making choices,
Yeah.
even experiencing heartbreak.
Right.
Those things,
Yeah.
even if they're painful,
Yeah.
seem to add a depth and a richness to life
Right.
that a simulation could never replicate.
That's a really insightful observation.
Thank you.
And it gets at the heart of what this thought experiment is trying to illuminate.
Yeah,
If we're hesitant to plug in,
Yeah.
even if it means giving up on guaranteed pleasure,
right.
doesn't that suggest there's more to a good life
Yeah,
than just pleasure?
it definitely seems that way.
Okay.
So if just pure pleasure isn't the whole story,
Right.
what else could be contributing to a good life?
Right.
What other factors?
What other factors should we be considering?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it leads us to another major family of theories,
Okay.
what are known as desire theories.
Okay.
But before we dive into those,
Okay.
let's take a quick break.
Sounds good.
Let those ideas sink in.
Okay. So we've established that chasing pleasure, even the higher, kind
Mhm.
not be the whole story when
Yeah.
it comes to well-being.
Exactly.
So what else is there? What are these desire series all about?
Desire theories shift the focus from pleasure to well-desires.
Okay.
The basic idea is a good life is one where you get what you want,
Okay.
where your desires are fulfilled.
But don't we desire all sorts of things?
Yeah.
Some fleeting, some long-lasting,
Yeah.
some maybe even bad for us.
Right.
How do desire theories account for that?
That's a great question. It leads to different versions of desire theory.
Okay.
So the most basic one
Okay.
is called present desire theory.
Okay.
Basically, it says that you're better off
Mm-hmm.
whenever your current desires are being satisfied.
But wouldn't that mean someone who's constantly getting what they want in the moment,
Yeah.
even if it's not ultimately good for them,
Right.
is living a good life?
Yeah.
What about that late night craving for ice cream?
Right.
Feels good in the moment.
It does.
Does it really contribute to the kind of life I want to live?
You've hit on one of the big problems with present desire theory.
Okay.
It doesn't account for the fact that some desires are,
Yeah.
let's just say, not very well thought out.
Right.
It's like that angry adolescent
Oh.
example that philosophers sometimes use.
Okay.
You know, if all that mattered was satisfying his immediate desire to lash out,
Uh-huh.
that wouldn't lead to a good life for him or anyone around him in the long run.
So just giving in to every whim and impulse
Right.
isn't really a recipe for well-being?
Not really.
even if it satisfies those immediate desires.
Yeah.
What did the more nuanced desire theories have to say about this? Well, that's where we get into things like comprehensive desire theory.
Okay.
And this takes a broader view.
Okay.
It's not just what you want right now,
Uh-huh.
but fulfilling the desires you have throughout your entire life.
So it's more about how satisfied you are with like the overall trajectory of your life,
Yeah.
not just these fleeting moments of satisfaction.
Exactly. Think of it like weaving a tapestry.
Okay.
It's not just about the individual threads.
Okay.
It's about how they all come together to create the overall picture.
I like that analogy.
Yeah. And even within comprehensive desire theory, there are different interpretations.
Okay.
One is called the summative view,
Okay.
the idea that the more desires you fulfill throughout your life, the better.
Okay. That makes sense on the surface.
Yeah.
But I can imagine some scenarios where just adding up the number of desires fulfilled
Right.
might not give you the full picture.
Right.
What about situations where someone has a lot of desires that, even if fulfilled,
Yeah.
wouldn't actually lead to a truly good life?
Right. That's a good point. You're anticipating the challenges philosophers have raised.
Oh, good.
One thought experiment is called Parfit's addiction.
Okay.
Imagine a drug
Oh,
that once you start taking it,
Uh-huh.
creates an overwhelming desire for more of the drug.
Okay.
But the twist is the drug itself doesn't actually give you any pleasure.
Okay.
It just prevents you from experiencing withdrawal symptoms.
So you're driven to take this drug,
Yeah.
not because it makes you feel good,
Right.
but because not taking it makes you feel bad.
Exactly.
That sounds like a recipe for a pretty miserable existence,
It does.
even if you're technically satisfying your desire for the drug.
And according to a simple summative view of desire theory, as long as you keep taking the drug
Uh-huh.
and fulfilling that desire, your life is going well.
Right.
But that seems counterintuitive, right?
It does.
A life driven by addiction, even a harmless one, doesn't feel like a truly good life.
Totally.
Even if all your desires are met.
Yeah, it feels like something's missing from the equation.
Yeah.
What other versions of desire theory are there?
To address this scenario, some philosophers prefer what's called a global view
Yep.
of comprehensive desire theory.
Okay.
And this says that desires about the overall shape and content of your life
Okay.
should hold more weight than just these fleeting desires
Oh.
or these persistent but ultimately unfulfilling desires.
So if you had like a deep desire to not be an addict,
Right.
that would outweigh the constant desire for the drug in this Parfit's addiction scenario.
Exactly. It's about what kind of life you want to be living overall,
Okay.
not just satisfying these isolated desires.
But even the global view
Yeah.
runs into some tricky cases.
It does.
What about this orphan mug thought experiment?
Yes.
So imagine a young man
Okay.
who was raised in a monastery and he's never experienced the outside world.
Right.
He has a really strong desire to be a monk,
Right.
and his life within the monastery fulfills all of his current desires.
Yeah.
But couldn't you argue that his life might be better if he experienced the world beyond the monastery walls?
Yeah.
Like maybe there are things out there that would bring him even greater fulfillment,
Yeah.
even if he's not aware of them right now?
That's a great point. That's one of the challenges with desire theories.
Okay.
They seem to suggest that what we currently desire is the ultimate measure of a good life.
Yeah.
But what if our desires are limited by our experiences,
Right.
our knowledge,
Right.
our upbringing?
Yeah. So how do we account for the fact that there might be things that are good for us,
Right.
even if we don't currently desire them?
That's where we get informed desire theory.
Okay.
This theory proposes that the best life is the one you would desire.
Okay.
If you were fully informed about all the facts, if
Okay.
you had
What?
perfect knowledge and understanding.
So it's not just about what we happen to want based on our current limited perspective,
Yeah.
but what we would want if we knew everything.
Exactly.
Right.
What we would truly desire if we had all the information.
But even the informed desire theory has its critics.
It does.
What about the grass counter?
Yeah, so imagine a brilliant mathematician
Okay.
who, even with all the knowledge in the world,
Yeah.
decides that their greatest desire is to count blades of grass.
Okay.
And they find genuine fulfillment in this pursuit.
Okay.
Even though to most people it would seem like kind of a waste of their talents.
It seems like there are just some things that are objectively valuable,
Yeah.
like using your gifts to contribute to the world.
Uh-huh.
Even if someone doesn't personally desire those things,
Right.
does that mean even the most sophisticated desire theory falls short?
That's a really insightful point.
Okay, good.
And it leads us to the final family of theories we'll be exploring,
Okay.
what are known as objective list theories.
Okay.
And these propose that there are certain things that are just good for us,
Okay.
regardless of whether we enjoy them or want them.
All right, objective list theories. These
Yeah.
sound intriguing.
Yeah.
What sets them apart from the hedonism and the desire theories?
Well, what's fascinating about objective list theories
Yeah.
is they kind of step outside the realm of subjective experience
Okay.
and say certain things are just inherently good for us,
Okay.
regardless of whether they bring us pleasure or
Yeah.
fulfill our desires.
So instead of focusing on like what feels good or what we happen to want,
Right.
they're saying there's kind of like a universal checklist
Yeah.
for a good life.
They're like fundamental building blocks of well-being.
A set of essential ingredients,
Yeah.
regardless of individual preferences.
Exactly. And common contenders on this list
Okay.
include things like knowledge,
Right.
friendship, achievement,
Huh.
and even moral virtue.
Okay.
The idea is these things are intrinsically good for us,
Okay.
whether or not we happen to enjoy them or
Oh.
want them at any given moment.
I can see how those things could contribute to a good life,
Yeah,
even if you're not someone who naturally craves them.
right.
But I can also see how this approach might strike some people as a bit, well, elitist. Like,
Yeah.
who gets to decide what goes on this objective list
Right.
and impose it on everyone else?
Right.
Doesn't that disregard, like, individual autonomy
Yeah.
and the right to choose our own paths?
That's a really important point, and that's a common critique
Okay.
of objective list theories.
Okay.
But there are ways to address it.
Right.
Some philosophers argue that autonomy itself
Okay.
should be a central item
Oh, interesting.
on the list.
Okay.
That freedom to make choices about your own life,
Right.
even if those choices don't align perfectly
Uh-huh.
with someone else's idea of what's good.
So even if there are objective goods,
Right.
we still have the right to choose how we pursue them.
Exactly.
Or even if we pursue them at all.
Yeah.
It's not about forcing a specific vision of the good life
Right.
on everyone.
It's more about recognizing that some things might contribute to a good life,
Right.
even if we don't always see their value right away.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So if someone believes in an objective list,
Yeah.
How do they go about deciding what should be on it?
yeah, that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
Like many areas of philosophy,
Yeah.
it often comes down to careful reflection.
Okay.
Consider judgment, reasoned arguments.
So it's not about just like declaring what's good for everyone,
Right.
but engaging in this like thoughtful and open-minded
Yeah,
process of inquiry and debate.
exactly.
Yeah.
And this debate between objective list theories
Yeah.
and these other theories we've discussed,
Right.
hedonism, desire theories,
Mm-hmm.
really gets at the core of how we understand what's truly valuable in a life.
Yeah.
Like, if we're hesitant to plug into the experience machine,
Yeah.
it suggests that there might be more to well-being
Right.
than just subjective experience.
It's like asking ourselves,
Yeah,
what makes a life worth living beyond just feeling good?
exactly.
What gives our lives meaning and purpose, even in the face of challenges and setbacks?
Yeah, what do we want to leave behind as our legacy?
Those are big questions.
They are. And ultimately, I think each of us has to grapple with them
We do.
for ourselves.
Yeah. There's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
What makes a life good for one person
Yeah,
might not be the same for another.
right.
But by exploring these different philosophical perspectives,
Yeah,
we can gain a deeper understanding of the possibilities and complexities of well-being.
it's like we've given our listeners a toolkit,
Yeah.
a bunch of different lenses
Yeah.
through which to examine their own lives
Right.
and values and apply these ideas
Yeah.
to their own unique circumstances and figure out what resonates
Yeah.
most deeply with them.
Exactly. And perhaps the most important takeaway is
Yeah,
there's no single definitive answer to the question of well-being.
yeah, it's a journey.
It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery,
Right.
reflection,
Yeah,
and maybe even a bit of philosophical pondering
yeah, a little bit of that.
along the way.
That's great. So listeners,
Yeah.
as you continue your own deep dive into well-being,
Yeah.
here's a final question to ponder.
All right.
If you could design your own objective list
Uh.
for a good life,
Mm-hmm.
what would be on it?
Yeah.
And how would you balance those objective goods
Yeah.
with your own desires and preferences?
Right. What would a truly fulfilling
Yeah.
and meaningful life look like for you?
It's a question worth reflecting on.
It is.
So thanks for joining us
Yeah.
on this deep dive into the philosophy of well-being.
My pledge.
Until next time, keep exploring,
Keep questioning
keep questioning,
and keep striving.
keep striving to live a life that is truly good for you.
And for those around you.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the well-being of each of us
Yes.
is interconnected.
We're all in this together.
We are.
Striving to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to flourish.
That's a beautiful sentiment.
And on that note,
Yeah.
we'll wrap up this episode of The Deep Dive. Until next time.
Yeah.
Happy pondering, everyone.
Thanks for listening.